Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Let's see here. I'm going to get us on mute. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Let's see here. I'm going to get us on mute. Hello. Okay, so we are going to get started. And for those of you who are just joining in, I want to welcome you. If you could please, again, my name is Renee, if we haven't met before. If you can, please mute yourself so we're gonna record this, and that way we have a clean recording. We're talking today about demystifying dangerous diet culture, and I'm very excited to be talking about this with all of you and to be having this conversation. Just gonna pull up my notes. It's a little after our start time, so. All right, here we go. By the way, for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, we have people coming in from a few different venues. So some people are calling in on their phones. There are some people who are taking part in the live stream, which is really exciting. And then we also have some people on our video chat as well. So kind of all different directions. I do not have an exact PowerPoint for this purposefully, but I would really recommend that if you have a pen and paper near you, I definitely would recommend you jot down some notes. If something sticks out to you, if you don't have anything to take notes with, that's okay. Of course, you'll benefit from this greatly. But what I want to do as we begin is just tell you briefly why I want to share this particular topic with you. And most importantly, why it's so important right now. So again, I'm talking about this idea of demystifying dangerous diet culture. And I chose that word demystify very purposefully because I have seen in my years of working in this industry, which has been about 15 years or so. I've been in the coaching space for 20 years. I actually hired my first life coach when I was 19 years old, technically, and 20 years ago. I'll share a little bit more about myself for those of you who might not know me just yet in a little while. But right now, I just really want to break down there's almost like a exciting magic pill quality to dieting, but on one hand. And then on the other hand, there's this dread and this terrible feeling around it. And then there's also, in between all of that, this really big question is like, what do I eat? How do I take care of myself? What do I feed my body? Or in another realm, there might be a whole lot of issues going on with your body, or maybe even some things that you're noticing around mental or emotional eating. The ability to not stop eating certain foods. We're going to get into all of that stuff today. So this topic is kind of big, but I'm going to try to streamline it as much as possible. And we're probably going to take about an hour, maybe a little bit. I gave us about an hour and 15 minutes. I also am going to be speaking a little bit about a program I'm really excited about that we have here in our community called My Nutrition 360. And it's a group coaching circle, an 8-week long one. And I'll share a little bit about that as we go along, and a little bit more towards the end, and how you can apply to be a part of that if it's something that interests you. So as we dive in, let's talk about who this is for. So I want to share with many of you that one of the things that I come across is people who definitely have cravings for sugar. So if you've been following me in any way, shape, or form in the last 9 years, you've definitely heard me talk about sugar. Many of you might even be here because of a talk you heard me give around sugar. But this is only a fraction of what we're speaking about today. There's a lot of people who may benefit from this conversation today who have been consistently dieting for most of their life. Also, there's people who might be here who want to just feel a little bit more trim or spend more time moving in their body. Maybe they feel their body aging. Perhaps you have some aches and pains or some tight tendons or muscles, or it's harder to stand up these days and you just know that you're not necessarily loving yourself and appreciating your body like you could be. I also work with a lot of people who would fit this description, and this would be really targeted towards you also if you are wondering, is this something I want to continue paying attention to today? Because again, I want to respect that we have a lot of stuff coming at us at all times. And I mean, our culture is crazy. We have videos and articles. And one of my beautiful clients shared with me today that she thinks she ordered a book every single day last week, which I've done that before too, right? So there's just so much information. And I work with a lot of people who are really into holistic nutrition. A lot of people who work with me are actually life or nutrition coaches, or they're going to school to be coaches. I work with psychotherapists. I actually have quite a few clients over the years who've been medical doctors or chiropractors. And so a lot of the people who this also relates to are not just someone who might be struggling with dieting, but somebody who knows a lot about it and maybe even teaches other people about dieting and is finishing up maybe some coursework or doing late nights going back to school and maybe adrenally fatigued and exhausted and doesn't really know what to do anymore because their body has changed or shifted. Maybe you have had a child and you have noticed your body change after that. And so these are some of the big ones. There's a lot of people who also may benefit from this who feel frustrated. You might be, I'm going to use the word victim of the diet culture, where you look in the mirror and you see what is the pooch we call it in the media in the front, or you might feel like your weight has been a constant struggle. You might feel like you have a lot of fat in certain areas of your body, and perhaps you judge it. Maybe you're someone who feels constantly hungry or sluggish or exhausted. And I just want all of you to know, I totally relate to all of these things. Sometimes, it's not just that we don't know what to do. Maybe we do know what to do, but we also don't have the energy to do it. We might feel like we quit on ourselves pretty easily. We might also be kind of critical. And sometimes it really comes down to time management, where we just don't know how we're going to make the time. Even though we have this list of all the things that we want to do, we can't find a way to fit it in. It's like we need the 36-hour day instead of the 24-hour day. So these kinds of things, if they are relatable in any way, shape, or form, or if you are feeling like everything is fine right now and that you wouldn't change anything and you're just here because you're interested in what I have to say, then that's awesome too. So what I want to do, though, is dive in and share a little bit about me. For those of you who don't know me, again, my name is Renee Jane, and I'm a holistic nutrition practitioner, a functional therapist, and a somatic life coach. Somatic, by the way, means the body in essence. And I have a private practice for over 9 years, since 2010. And I work with people on a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual level. I also do corporate consulting. I do one-on-one coaching. I, of course, do live events like this. And I also speak publicly. I'm writing a book right now. So it's a little bit about me. I really help guide you to discover what I call this journey to love yourself naked. And it's a journey, but it's mostly a practice. It's not like, okay, I'm here, I love myself, which, by the way, for most people, including myself for most of my life, loving myself felt so unrealistic and so far and extreme and maybe even radical that I didn't even believe that that was a possibility. And so I can really relate to that. But I really look at it as a practice. It's a choice. It's almost a recovery practice where we are learning to recover the self. And I want to begin a brief story to share today, because I think it really depicts this idea of this dangerous diet culture and talks about a little bit of the root of how I got here at the same time, so you can get to know me a little bit better. So back in 2002, I was sitting, I was actually traveling out of the country, and I was sitting on an airplane, and I was reading a book, and This book was referred to me from a friend. It was actually called The Omnivore's Dilemma, and the author's name is Michael Pollan. I highly recommend that you get that book. And you know what, I don't know if it was 2002 or 2004. I can't remember. Whatever year that book came out. But regardless, somewhere around that time. And there was a man who was sitting next to me. So I was in the middle seat. And he was by the window, and he looked over and he kept paying attention to my book and kind of looking at it. And I didn't really say anything. And then he asked me about it, and we started this conversation. To make a long story short, I spoke to this man for the entire 4-hour flight. He was very kind, very gracious, and he told me his story, which was very kind of shock and awe, but also very inspiring. So the long and short of it is this man was a farmer from the Midwest, the Iowa, I think, area. And he was the third generation in his family to farm his land. So his grandfather used all kinds of what we would call conventional forms of farming practices. And so did his father. And so when he came along and it was his turn to run the farm, he started to learn a little bit more in his generation about organic farming. And his father and his grandfather, who was still alive at the time, was very resistant to this idea of organic, not just because of the fact that it would probably cost them a lot more money, but also because they just didn't want to change all of their practices around and do things differently and risk all the things that it would risk. And there's a big process in really changing your farm from being a conventional growing farm to an organic farm, which we, of course, don't need to go into those details today. After some time went along, this man, again, he grew up on the farm. He grew up helping his grandfather and his father out. And as he began this process of farming conventionally, he started noticing he was getting these huge, like boil-like tumor growth things all over his body. And they started out pretty small, and they got bigger and bigger and bigger. And he was trying to hide them under his clothes to the point where he couldn't hide anymore. They were becoming painful. And he went to every doctor that you can imagine. He was starting to lose energy. He couldn't get out of bed. He couldn't sleep. He could barely run the farm. And no one was able to really help him. He was on all these different kinds of medications. And ultimately, he found some doctor, which back then they may have called, you know, the crazy doctor who did unconventional kinds of things. Sorry, I just kind of drifted away because I'm thinking about the fact that we call conventional farming conventional when in reality it probably should be switched around, but that's a whole nother topic of conversation. So this doctor suggested that he do a detox, and he didn't really know what that was, but he decided that he would go grocery shopping and he would buy as much organic, healthy food as possible. And he started to detox his body with water and with healthy foods and whole foods. And he described to me that the smell and the pain coming from his body was unimaginable. He said that the smell was so bad that he was embarrassed to even go in the grocery store in his town. So he drove hours further away to other stores so he wouldn't be around his community and they wouldn't smell him. And what turns out is that he was detoxing from all of the pesticides and all the chemicals that he had been around. Now, granted, he was spraying these chemicals, and so he was much closer to them than you or I might be. But anyway, to kind of sum up this very long story, he decided to change the family even against the wishes of his father and grandfather and turn his farm, which is a pretty big farm, into an organic farm because of this. And it really, gosh, it was that pivotal moment for me. Here I am reading this book that really did change my life also. But I also had this moment with this man that really showed me that the personal is political. And what I mean by that is that when people ask me about, like, well, Renee, how do you maintain your healthy lifestyle? Well, first of all, I've been doing this for a while, and I'm not perfect. I'm not some guru. I'm learning every single day along with you. But I also have created a lot of practices that have worked for me. But when I really get to the core of it, the root of like, why has this stuck for me and why doesn't it stick for other people? It's political. And I know that seems odd. This is not going to be a big old political conversation. I'm not going to go into all of those things, but I have to talk about this because it sparked within me almost an anger that, oh my God, like, how can we allow our poor farmers to be dealing, like they're spraying this chemical that's literally killing them. And they're needing to be right next to it every single day. And then they're feeding our humanity with this food, and not to mention what it's doing to our soil quality. And so this was really a kind of a smack in the face for me, where I started to get really interested in a lot about farming practices. And I started a business around that time, but my business back then was to go around and interview farmers in my local area. I started a compost pile and an organic garden, and I started to figure out, like, how can I help these organic farmers market their stuff at farmers markets. I quickly learned that I was doing a wonderful service, but it was not a business because the farmers couldn't pay me, and that it wasn't necessarily doing much except for spreading some word. It was more, I would call, like, healthy activism of local farms. And I still do that till this day. I guess I'm doing that now. But I was this lifelong junk food addict prior to this. And I'll tell you a little bit more about my story in a little while. I don't want to go into a ton of detail, but I do want to share with you a quick quote. So there's a client who shared this with me recently, so I'm going to read it. It says, "As a lifelong junk food addict, I tried many ways to get clean with no permanent cure. My first lesson was with a spiritual advisor, Renee Jane. She helped me immediately. First, I got to know what most of what I thought was healthy was really various forms of preserved processed poisons. So I easily improved by just learning the truth. The next lesson I learned was to say no to the perilous monsters and yes to the pure, healthy habits. The numbers don't lie. I've lost 56 pounds so far. I went from 45% fat to 28% fat. And this client also said that he went from 46-inch pants to 38-inch pants, and that he's no longer wasting his money on pills, prescriptions, fast food, and the investment has saved him thousands." And I wanted to share that with you because sometimes when I read things like this, what I like to read is not what's actually said, what's written in between the lines. And what he's also saying is he got angry too. He started to see what was in the food that he was eating. And that makes a big difference. And it makes a big deal when we are thinking about, how do I want to create healthy change and make it permanent? So part of the reason we're all here today is we're going to be talking about the different kinds of diets. I want to talk about what veganism is all about, and ketogenic dieting. I want to talk about paleo, or even the idea of what plant-based eating might be. And I'm going to just say right off the bat, I'm not going to be like a huge proponent of any one of these particular diets, because what I am a proponent of first and foremost is you and you finding what works best for your body. This is not the popular idea. I'll be honest. I think that it becomes more exciting when one person says, hey, like, I am a vegan practitioner, come see me. Or I am a paleo practitioner, come see me. I'm not going to do that, because you are a unique person. And so is your cousin, and so is your neighbor, and so is your children and your parents. And all of you, even though you might have similar genetics or cells as some of your family members, you're all different, and what your body needs. And there's so many other factors going on that are emotional, spiritual, and mental, combined with the physical makeup and structure of your body. We can't just say this one diet works for one person. I'm going to prove it to you as we go through this particular webinar today. So one thing that I started to learn when I said that the personal is political, what does that mean? Well, I started to get personal about some of the things that were happening in our culture. One of those was just noticing how we treat our animals. So Feedlots are a very prevalent way for us to, or CAFOs is another word for them, way for us to get our meat from. It's mostly centered around cows or steers, we should say. And they're not only are they treated horrible, but they're mostly fed things that their bodies don't know how to digest. So cows are actually meant to eat grass. They have something called a rumen, and they have more than one stomach. They have two, and they can digest grass, whereas us as humans, we cannot. And when they eat grass, not only does that grass taste amazing to them, all the grasses taste like different flavors. There was even a grass for them that tastes like ice cream, for example. So they eat this grass, but then also it infuses B12 from those grasses and other B vitamins into them. And so when people eat those animals, if people do eat animals, if they choose to do that, then what happens is they get the benefits from the vitamins as well. So what happens in our big feedlot farms, and by the way, I want to just say, if you're just joining us, this is not me saying you should go eat meat. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just giving you a little background in how we do things, so we can have this big picture, and then you can start to make a better educated decision on how you want to treat your body, and also what you might want to take a stand for, because I think that that's an important aspect of this. So what we tend to do, though, is I say we, meaning our food system, the people who want to sell us a lot of meat, they want to fatten those cows and cattle up as fast as humanly possible and send them to slaughter because they make a lot more money by doing it. That's why they shove all of them into these tiny little cells, basically, where they can't move and they don't get to roam around in grass. They're basically in this small structure, and they're fed things that make them fatter. Antibiotics are needed because they're eating corn, and often corn and grain and a bunch of other things mixed in with that corn and grain, often things like hormones to help fatten them up even quicker. So when a cow eats corn, they don't know how to digest the corn, and then they start to get sick, and that's why they need the antibiotics. And so what we've done as a culture is actually just put antibiotics in their feed to kind of be preventative in nature. And so when we go to our grocery store, if we don't buy grass-fed meat, we're often getting this corn-fed meat, which is just not good or healthy in any way, shape, or form for our body. Not to mention, this is what is really in fast food. And so is fast food addictive? Yes, in many ways. Salt, is that addictive? No, there's a lot of salt in fast food. Is sugar addictive? Very much so. Is fat addictive? No, not necessarily. Is caffeine addictive, which is also in fast food? Very much so. Starbucks is a whole nother conversation. But, the reason I bring this up is because we're consuming a lot of these things. And sometimes people will get to this point and they're listening to this and like, well, that's why I don't eat meat, Renee. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome if you choose not to for yourself. But for those of you who might want to eat meat, we need to know the difference. We need to understand why we want to eat certain meat and why we don't want to eat other kinds of meats. Processed foods are a common denominator between all quote unquote diets. So if we are eating a strict vegan diet, for example, you will often find that people will still gravitate towards buying things in boxes. And veganism, which I'm going to talk a lot more about in a little while, is not about eating just a bunch of things that come in boxes and frozen foods and processed foods, in essence, because processed foods either have high salt or high sugar and low fiber. And every diet that works is low in sugar and high in fiber. So keep that in mind. We want a high fiber diet. So no matter what you eat, it needs to be high in fiber. So keep that in kind of your toolbox, so to speak. This processed food piece of the puzzle is a huge disaster when it comes to our diet industry. It began back in the 70s when the industrial food revolution got started. I won't bore you with all the details, but essentially back then, mothers, mostly mothers, went back to work and they didn't have time, and marketers capitalized on that because they felt that it would be wonderful to give them microwave meals. I grew up on this stuff. I was born at this time, and I think the mothers in that time were very grateful that they could take a box and mix water and put it in the microwave and it would be done, and they didn't have to do this huge preparation. But what started to happen is the food companies began getting rich. So if you want to become rich, if that's your goal, you can invest in food companies because they're still making bank out there because of this. But our biochemistry in our body is basically a result of this changed environment that we have gone through. And so I'm kind of painting this picture of not only processed and packaged foods, but also the quality of our soil that has been diminished because of the pesticides we've sprayed on it, the quality of the food, the whole foods, the vegetables, the fruits, because of the chemicals and things that we've sprayed upon it. And then of course, the quality of our meat products and those, which is another conversation I don't have a ton of time to get into today, but one of the hardest things is that these feedlot farms, they give off such a stench and so much pollution that it actually trickles down into our water supply. And it's one of the biggest causes, not only of greenhouse gas emissions, more so than cars, by the way. I don't know if everyone on here knows that, but what happens is when we look at the statistics, the cow farts, the methane, just being blunt, gives off more greenhouse gas than cars do. So this is, and I'm not talking about beautiful, fun, loving cows on your local farm down the street that are roaming in the grass. I'm talking about these huge farms, these feedlot farms that I was referring to. So that's really impacted our water quality. So the quality of the foods that we're eating, we want to pay attention to this because I'm going to come back to that a little bit more. Now we combine this with the fact that our culture has also realized that they could make a lot of money because of corn. And so we need to watch for this one because this is a common denominator with all of the diets as well. So if we think about, you know, I'm from the United States, if you haven't been able to tell so far, but one of the biggest crops that we have here in the United States is corn. Maybe next to that would be soy. And if you look at the products on our shelves that are in processed and packaged foods, they are full of corn and soy, which again, our body doesn't know how to process at the extent in which we're eating it. Same thing with sugar. And that sugar often shows up in the form of something called high fructose corn syrup, which is really not awesome for our body. A new thing that we've added into this mix is something called glyphosate. And glyphosate is an ingredient in what would be called Roundup weed killer. And this is commonly sprayed upon our grains in America. And so we have this kind of huge explosion of gluten-free that has happened over the years. And there are people who really can't tolerate gluten. I'm one of them. But for the most part, what we're starting to really discover, and I say we because we're getting more and more bits of science about this as we do more research, but what we're discovering is that it's not so much the gluten than it is the glyphosate. It's the chemical that we're spraying on these grains that is killing off our gut bacteria. And so we have very important bacterias in our guts, good bacteria and bad bacteria. And we need to have the good bacteria outweigh the bad bacteria so we can break down our foods. We need to have good amounts of what's called hydrochloric acid in our stomach so we can break down our foods. And glyphosate is really, I was going to say helping. It's diminishing that quality of our gut health, which is more and more science is talking about how that could contribute to depression. And then more specifically, it's making a huge deal on our ability to digest food. And so we're finding that people just can't digest the foods like they used to before. Dairy is a great example of that. Whereas years ago, some people could digest dairy. Nowadays, a lot of people cannot digest dairy. I'll speak a little bit more on dairy. I personally don't eat dairy because my body does not like it. Kind of coming back to this. So then we get into genetically modified foods. And I'm going to tell you, like, all these things I'm talking about, they could be an hour-long talk in and of itself, of course. So, you know, these are really complex ideas, but I just want to kind of break down for you that behind the diet industry and behind this culture, there's all these kinds of things that are going on that people take political stances on. And when I say the personal is political, is that, like, this is the food that's on our fork. This is the stuff we're spending our money on. This is the stuff that's going in our body. I saw this like a meme thing on social media recently, and it said something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing, that, like, you know, Americans will spend all this money and time eating all this, like, processed and packaged foods. They don't even know what the ingredients are, and half of them are filled with crap that are really bad for them and unrecognizable. They don't even know how to pronounce the ingredients, yet they're afraid to eat a brown bruised banana. And I just laughed out loud because it's so true, right? And for many of us anyway. So the genetically modified foods is a big issue, mostly because there's one company, it's called Bayer now, it used to be called Monsanto, and they're really in charge of the majority of the seeds that our farmers are able to plant. And again, this is a really big conversation I don't have a lot of time to go into, but what that really does is it limits the kinds and the quality of the vegetables and fruits that we have access to. So, for example, if you were to go to Africa today, and I'm using Africa as a great example because much of Africa is not, overpicked. It's not farmed in this way. You know, like, you can still go to these huge open fields in Africa, and you could climb up a lemon tree and pick fresh lemons and fresh mangoes. And what you would find if you did that lemon looks so different in comparison to a lemon that you would buy even at your Whole Foods market or at your local grocery store. If you would pick a fresh mango, the taste of it there. And by the way, this goes to show us that what happens when we have these seeds that are sold to us over here, they make and genetically modify the seeds to withstand hundreds of miles of travel because they want to make sure that those foods, fruits, vegetables, get to you and they still look nice. They don't care if they're lacking in the qualities that we need to absorb them. And so our quality of food is really not what it needs to be or what it used to be by far. So let's keep that in mind. So I want to just briefly share as we're moving forward here. Our biochemistry really drives our behavior. And so when we're consuming a lot of these different kinds of foods, what starts to happen is it starts impacting our hormonal structure. It starts impacting what's called our insulin receptors. And insulin blocks something called leptin in our body. And I'm not going to go into a ton of details on this, but leptin is one of those things that tells us whether or not we are full. And we want to know that, right? We want to know and if we're full, because if we don't know that, then we just keep eating and eating and eating, and we have no idea what the shut off point is. And there's only 2 times in our life when our body like naturally gains weight naturally. And that one is pregnancy for women, of course. And then puberty is the other time that our bodies naturally gain weight. This is necessary. It's basically how our species survives, right? We procreate and then we grow through puberty and we become adults. And, our leptin worked at the right time. It actually turned on at this time to help us gain weight to support our body. And so this is really important. But what started to happen, and I'm not going to go in a lot of detail here, but our insulin started to increase so much so that it started blocking out the leptin. And so the $1 million question is, what made our insulin increase so much? And the big answer to the question is high fructose corn syrup and corn and all of these different kinds of sugars, fructose and sucrose, which is what makes up high fructose corn syrup. And there's, a lot of people who have told me before, when it comes to sugar, Renee, I don't eat a lot of sugar. I actually eat very little sugar. But what we sometimes forget is how much of it is put into our bread and our ketchup and hidden inside our favorite crackers. And for example, vitamin water is something that's touted, that brand, vitamin water, is touted to be this healthy water, right? Same thing with a Gatorade. Like we serve it to our children on the side of the soccer field. And one, it has synthetic vitamins in it. Our body doesn't even know how to process those vitamins. It's sometimes filled with food coloring that's not good for our body, but it's also full of sugar, so much sugar. And so the natural consumption for us as adults is about, I think it's about 15 grams a day. It could be off. It might be 14 or something, but it's pretty close, about 15 grams a day. And, adolescents are currently consuming like 35, 40 grams a day. I mean, it's out of this world high. And we're supposed to consume a little bit of sugar. I mean, it's not like we don't need some. It provides this glucose, a certain amount of energy. But the fact is that we're getting so much that we just can't handle it. And so our liver is in this overload, crazy thing. And so this is what I got to share with all of you. If you're really paying attention and following this is what has led us to dieting. Because if we think about well, how did I get here? Well, we got here because of the state of our food system. And one of the things that I like to share with people is that when we think about cigarette smoking, education was going around for many years before they started making it illegal to specifically advertise cigarette smoking. And that education didn't help. It didn't help. So it didn't help with the tobacco. So even though we're talking about this now, one of the core problems is that even though we know what to do, it doesn't mean that we're going to make the change. And so we have to actually take a little bit different approach. And I'm going to get to what that different approach is here in a little while. So one of the factors of this diet culture has come into obesity, and it's become an epidemic. But on the other side of obesity, so we have this range of eating disorders, is we have anorexia and bulimia. And then there's another one, which is called orthorexia nervosa, which is a huge one in my industry, where we have all of these healthy people, health practitioners, nutritionists, people who have become obsessive compulsive with dieting. And by the way, when I was in nutrition school, and I think back to how I was back then, I was probably in that realm. I was becoming obsessive with it. And I could tell you stories. and there's so many people in our diet industry that we can say it has everything to do with the airbrushing on our magazine covers. Yes. It has everything to do with how we advertise. Yes. We tend to think that, just if you look at the average person who is touted in this ideal, false ideal, illusionary ideal of what a woman or a man should look like, it's this thin physique, right? It's usually a white or blonde haired person. And that's just not the makeup of what people all look like in our world. It's just not reality. And then when we airbrush on top of that, and then we have this false idea of what people are supposed to look like and what people really do eat, there's a lot of hiding in the industry, a lot of lying about what people actually eat, and then hiding out and eating the stuff that they don't talk about. So there's damage that's been not only done to our gut health, but damage that's been done to our brains. And so we're searching, and we've been searching for many years. Hopefully you all hear me, because I just see that my internet connection is a little unstable. So please write to me in the chat, by the way, if for some reason you can't hear me. I appreciate that. So one of the things that I want to share with all of you is there's this idea of called the Browning effect. Okay. And the Browning effect, let me ask this question to give you kind of an interpretation of what it means. What are these 5 Hey everyone, I'm so sorry. I guess my internet wanted to kick me off today. So hopefully you're all still there. Let me just make sure we're still recording this and we're still live. We are, good. Okay, so I was just talking about this idea. I don't know how much of it you heard, so I'll back up just for a brief second. Talking about this idea called the Browning effect, and the 5 foods that all have kind of something in common are beer and bread and ham and coffee and turkey or chicken, okay? What do they have in common? They're all brown. And this browning reaction, it's actually a kind of maybe a scientific name, but really what it is, it's kind of known as the Maillard reaction. And what this is that it is part of the aging process. It ages our body really, really fast, because what's happening is we're eating foods that are not whole foods that are alive. We're eating things that are dead or dying. They're browning faster, and therefore we're browning faster. And so when we eat, and the typical standard American breakfast, it's like eggs and bacon, right? And like cooked toast as an example. And then we down it with orange juice, which, by the way, a new study just came out talking about that glyphosate is in our orange juice, as well as there's a lot of fructose in our orange juice, which is so hard on our liver. Our typical like standard American breakfast is literally one of the worst things that we can be eating. And so these 2 big problems begin to happen to our body. One is cells start to age rapidly. And so we experience something called oxidative stress, and our body starts to age quickly. The other thing that starts to happen is we get something called fatty liver, where our liver just is overloaded. It's poor thing. It doesn't know how to process all this stuff that we're putting into it. And I really want to be upfront also by sharing with you guys that this is not like a judgment. This is just about getting curious about what we've been experiencing as a culture. Most of us, and myself included, like we didn't know. We just kind of going along with how life is most of the time. And so if you got into the diet industry years ago, you might have been doing things like Weight Watchers or like the Atkins diet or the South Beach diet. And so, if those things worked, then we probably would still be doing many of them. And maybe they did work for a little while. But the thing is all of the diets can work for a little while. Every single one of them could work for a week or 2 weeks or 2 months, but they're just not sustainable practices. And the idea of having to consistently and regularly be dieting over and over, and this roller coaster and struggle, is out of this world stressful to our body. And the reality there is that stress is one of the biggest things that impacts our health. And I dare say even maybe more than food. I'm so passionate about this, if you can't tell. And I want to also be upfront with you that I'm taking applications right now for a program in our community that I run. It's called My Nutrition 360. It's a coaching circle. It's 8 weeks long, and I give a ton of value throughout it. I'll tell you more about it towards the end of this webinar. But I just want to share with you that if you want to, you can apply, and I can have a chat with you on the phone and give you even more details, and we'll see if we're a fit. One of the reasons that this is important to know, whether you work with me or you work with somebody else, that we talk a lot about food in the program, but it's a fraction. It's just a fraction. And if you've ever spoken or do with any of the clients that I've worked with in the last 9 years, I have over 1,500 hours of coaching experience one-on-one with clients, and even more hundreds of hours of speaking publicly with people, that we do begin working with food, and we establish the fundamentals, and we establish the practices that they need to make sure that their body is not dying from the browning of, well, I should have rephrased that differently. The reality is we're all dying. We're all dying. But the idea is, can we keep ourselves thriving for the period of time that we're here on Earth by eating living foods versus foods that are in the process of dying, right? I had this client tell me, he said, "You want to know the reason why I chose to work with you?" And in my Nutrition 360, by the way, I work with private clients, both men and women. And my Nutrition 360 is mostly women. And if I have enough men who apply, I probably will run a second group just for the men, so we can have kind of a separate, or people who identify as women or identify as men. Cisgender also are welcome. But this particular client said to me that he was listening, I think it was Dr. Wayne Dyer, and Dr. Wayne Dyer was talking about the subconscious mind and how our subconscious thoughts really impact every part of our life, and they impact not only our thoughts but our actions. And bringing more awareness to the subconscious mind of ours is one of the most important parts of our healing and our health. And then he showed up to my talk that same day, and I guess I said something to the effect of, you can't have a really unhealthy gut and feel like you are healthy at the same time, that they work hand in hand. And he said to me that he was a junk food addict at the time, and he was using food to numb out. And he started to see this connection between his obsessiveness with junk food and then dieting, and junk food and dieting, and never really realizing all of these subconscious thoughts that he couldn't see, that he realized he needed help to see them. And so I share this with you because I've been in this industry for a lot of years, in the coaching industry. I hired my first life coach when I was 19 years old, and I still work with practitioners and coaches till this day, 20 years later. And I can't see my own stuff sometimes, right? Like, we all need help to see our stuff, right? And we can't see it always on our own. And part of the reason why I started the My Nutrition 360 program is because we evolve and we heal and we recover when we're in community. And it is beautiful. It's one of the most passionate parts of my life and my career, is getting to be a part of that and watch it unfold and happen for people. Not to say I don't love working privately with my clients, because that's beautiful all in it of itself, but there's something really powerful when we have the synergy with other people, and we can see that we're not alone, and that other people share this same yo-yo dieting pattern that maybe we have shared also. So, you know, a lot of people have said to me, well, Renee, wait a minute, Weight Watchers has really helped my family. Like, my mother has lost so much weight, and I say, great, that's awesome. There's just many issues with these because they create this idea. In fact, on a side note, Weight Watchers, I believe last year, just set out a new campaign to change their name and remove the word weight, because this idea around losing weight is never something that I feel is healthy for us to promote. Now, is there room for people to lose weight sometimes for their health? Yes. Is there room for people to gain weight for their health sometimes? Yes. But we don't usually arrive at that healthy balance in our body by focusing on weight loss. We don't usually do that. And if we do, we usually can't maintain it. So the goal here is to find health. It's to find balance, or harmony might be a better word, in your body. It's to find out, what's the root cause? Why are my cells aging exponentially faster than maybe they should be? Why is my liver not detoxing properly? Why is it that I feel obsessive with so many of these foods that I have around me? Just want to check really quickly and make sure I didn't get kicked off again. So for those of you who are just joining us, I'm talking about this demystifying the dangers of the diet culture. So it just really concerns me, and it concerns me more and more because I have so many people who've come to me of all ages, but the generation that is, I guess, in their 20s right now, they grew up watching the world a little bit differently because they had a lot more exposure to the internet and the social interwebs and around a lot of these ideas that diets were the thing that you needed to do to change your body, and that your self-worth was derived from how you looked and not how you felt, and that external validation from what other people thought of you was more important than how you felt inside about yourself. And that one of the biggest things is that our self-worth came from this idea of maybe what we did for a living, or the relationship that we were in, or we compare and despair against the Hollywood market, which, if we think about how much we love, and again, I say we as in a culture, love watching people who are movie stars and in Hollywood. And most of them, I know some actresses and I know some people who, and actors who have been on set with some of our popular actors and actresses, that when we see them on the magazine cover, they don't look anything like that in real life. Nothing like that. They look very normal with cellulite and maybe not the six-pack abs that you might see. And again, nothing to say there's nothing wrong with wanting six-pack abs, but to have these standards and to have these dangerous ideas of what we should look like, or even to advertise the same kind of images over and over and over, and knowing that we will never look like that. Most of us will never look like that, is so harmful to us in our brain chemistry. And it's really done a number on our culture and on our people. And this is mostly a Western thing. In terms of the Eastern part of our world, it's not as big of a deal. A lot of the people here in the West are dealing with more self-worth issues than ever before. And so we kind of come to this synergy now. We come to this synergy of like soil quality and water quality and the packaged and processed foods and the corn and high fructose corn syrup and that industry and the sugar industry. And then we meld it with this low self-worth people put up on pedestals trying to look perfect. And we come to this root cause of perfectionism. And so when I think about the people who come to me, the clients that I work with the most, and by the way, I often say this, hi, I'm Renee, and I'm a recovering perfectionist. And recovery to me is a process of like peeling back, getting naked, right? Getting vulnerable, getting honest, being authentic about the fact that we make mistakes and that we're human and that we are not perfect. And that as we make those mistakes, we grow. And it's scary as hell. It's so scary that we have to look in the mirror sometimes and say, wow, I'm really not liking myself a whole lot right now. I'm judging myself. And sometimes this work is deep, but it's also so incredibly powerful when we start to take a look at, wow, maybe I have been dealing with perfectionism a little bit too much, and the diet industry feeds that. And so for me, when I wanted to give this talk and have this conversation with all of you, there's a little part of me that like a little anger and angst, and I think it's powerful anger to channel it, that like I'm angry at that our culture has been so inundated. I'm angry that our environment has been so overtaken with all of this stuff, and I want to do something about it. And I know that many of you are watching or paying attention in your own worlds and maybe in your own practices if you're a practitioner, because you want to do something about it too. And it's not going to happen just because we educate. It's not going to happen just because we talk about it here or there. It's going to happen because we make choices to change ourselves while we also make activism choices to change our environment. So in the kind of coaching psychology space with psychotherapy and life coaching and nutritional coaching, there's this thought, and I have to admit, I'm probably really guilty of this years ago too, that we used to say like everything is inside of you, and that if you change inside, everything on the outside changes too. And there is a little truth to that. There's no doubt that when we change our thoughts, we change our reality. Like we know that we are energetic beings, like that is true. But there's a lot of crap happening that is really driven by money, driven by big corporations. And so if we don't have this kind of duality about changing ourselves and making activist choices to vote with our fork, like I'm going to choose to buy organic, for example, then we're probably not going to see the change that we really want to see. We're not going to be the change that we really want to be. So I want to now dive a little bit into this idea of vegan and paleo and plant-based and keto, and talk to you about the differences. We're going to start with vegan. And again, I just want to share with all of you, I'm open to questions. I'm definitely open to comments. And I will tell you that each one of these, of course, is like an hour-long talk in of itself. So I'm going to be brief. I'm talking a bit fast for that reason. But, you know, veganism ism has an ISM. It's a belief system. It's more than a diet. To me, it's a way of life. And I'm going to share with you my experience in all of these also briefly. You know, I want to argue with one idea here, that a lot of people who say they are practicing a vegan diet aren't actually vegans. So that they might have chose it because they wanted to lose weight. So I was literally just giving a talk somewhere recently, and just was about a week ago. And there's a woman in there, and she's like, yeah, you know, my really good friend, she told me she's lost 10 pounds because she went vegan. And so like, she was really excited about this, and there's no judgment there. Like maybe that's what she wants to do. But when I say veganism, I'm not talking about using it necessarily as a diet right now. Although it could be, because that culture of dieting is so deeply ingrained that we could use veganism as a diet. But most people who choose veganism as a lifestyle, they do it because they care about the animals, because they don't want animals to die, that they have a very strong and very big perspective on how we should treat animals in our world. And they don't want to consume animal products in any way, shape, or form. I have been parts of vegan communities for most of my years in the nutrition world. I have a lot of vegan friends. We have a lot of incredible conversations around veganism. I have some friends who would even say that, like, even if their health wasn't the best, that they would still continue to be a vegan because they believe so strongly in the fact that animals should never be killed. They have huge political stances on it. So this is important just to put in perspective. And I think it's important for us not to judge. I think it's a political area, right? So it's easy to judge, but it's also important that we get really curious about it and why. You know, and I mentioned earlier today that one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gases, one of the biggest reasons our water supply is not the healthiest right now. I feel like in the next, I don't know, I don't want to predict this, but like 3-4 years, we're going to have huge problems more so with water because of this, is because we're eating so much meat. And that meat is just, it's not a sustainable environment for us. So it's scary. And that's scary for a lot of people. And a lot of people don't want to look at that, but it's true. It's not something that we're just making up. It's based on a lot of facts and information. So what I want to also say is that a lot of people come to this because of fear. And when I say fear, what I mean by that is they don't know what else to do. So they choose something, and they choose something that maybe somebody else said worked for them, or they choose something that maybe was the cool fad, and maybe it worked for a little while. This is also where I'm going to kind of lead now into ketosis a little bit, or called the ketogenic diet. But I do want to say this though, that when I talk about this, like, we can make a lot of solid arguments for each of these decisions. You know, some of them are political, like I said, but some are biological. You know, there's so much research on the vegan diet around our heart. You know, eating plants in general is amazing for our body, right? So that's awesome. Some are very personal, some are environmental. And I could legitimately, if I wanted to, spend this whole hour selling you on why that could be a great benefit. But you know what? I don't know your body exactly, and it may or may not work perfectly for you. So what I want to do right now is I want to just briefly share with you a little bit before I go into ketosis. I just want to share with you a little bit about my story here. So just to give you some perspective, I actually spent time as a vegan for quite some time in my life. So I was a practicing vegan, and I chose it not only for the health benefits, but because I really love animals and I didn't want to hurt the animals or kill the animals. I spent a lot of time in my life where I would be considered more plant-based, and I consumed fish along with mostly all plants, or what would be called a vegetarian lifestyle. I also spent a lot of time in my life learning about detoxing and how to, sorry, I got something in my eye, learn about detoxing and how to put my body into what's called ketosis. So practicing more of a ketogenic diet, and also experimenting a little bit with what would be called the paleo diet. There's all kinds of other ones in between. I likely tried most of those because as a huge nutrition fan and as a nutrition practitioner and practicing holistic practitioner, I've been my own guinea pig for a long time. And I think that's basically kind of normal in my industry to try all these things. But what really happens is sometimes we don't know what to do because there's so many choices. And then these choices also lead us to decision fatigue, and it can be a detriment. Like, okay, well, what do I do now? And that's where I find a lot of my clients come to me. They'll be into, conversations with me around like, I don't know what to eat, Renee. What do I do? And they may have tried all these things already and they fell off the wagon, so to speak, and they just weren't successful for long term. Nobody has a body like you. Nobody has a body like you. And so what the goal is, and don't forget this, is that you need to find what works best for your body. And you are unique. You have a genetic makeup like no other. And so and it's not just about your genes, you have a gut health like no other. And you got to find what works. And people tend to follow diets like sheep, and we jump on the next fad. And so, my story in a nutshell is that at a very young age, I found myself very addicted to sugar and hiding how much I was consuming. I ate a lot of ice cream because I worked at a Dairy Queen at age 14, I think 13 or 14. It was my first job. And I ended up with a ton of allergies. I had asthma. I had an inhaler, and I lived on allergy medication like they were Tic Tacs. At age 16, I was diagnosed with high cholesterol, and I ignored that because it wasn't as cool as getting my driver's license. So I just kind of let that go. I got HPV. I was also, on a lot of different, sorry, I'm really struggling with an eyelash in my eye. I'll just pull on through. Birth control pills, antibiotics. I think around age 18 or 19, it was probably 19, I got shingles. And the shingles were huge because I was basically bedridden for about 2 months, and I flunked out of 2 of my college classes because of that. After that, they couldn't figure out why I had almost no immune system. And they thought I had leukemia. I did not, thankfully. But I basically just was so exposed to allergens from food and from all the other things in my environment that my immune system wasn't functioning. I started around this time living with migraines that were very debilitating, and they were starting to ruin my life. At that same time, getting a ton of digestive issues and constipation. I was told around this time also that I may never have children because I lost my menstrual cycle for almost an entire year, and nobody knew why. I wasn't super skinny, wasn't working out all the time. In fact, I wasn't working out at all. I was eating really crappy and fearful of working out because I thought if I did too much, I might trigger a migraine. And so I was a basic mess hiding under my, comfy clothes on my couch and not necessarily knowing what to do. Years later, I started to discover some things about food. And this is really what led me to read the book I was sharing with many of you at the beginning of this conversation, and understanding a little bit more about the politics of food. And this really inspired me to do something called a detox, which I did in my Nutrition 360 program. By the way, I guide everyone through a very gentle whole foods detox that gives you options so you can learn about what your body needs. And that's really a big, powerful part of the program for people. Shortly after that, I started to notice that I had some issues with my thyroid, and then got pregnant, which was a good bonus because I didn't know that I was able to. But before that, I had a miscarriage, and learned a lot after my childbirth, which was 48 hours natural birth. I learned a lot about the pelvic floor. I learned a lot about adrenal fatigue. And then I started to develop nodules on my thyroid, which thankfully I was able to heal naturally. But then that led me to a lot of other issues with gallbladder and liver and fatty liver. And I did so many things during this time. So this is the time when I was sharing with you that I went vegan. This is the time when I decided not to eat meat at all, and had then started to realize that my estrogen, when I was vegan, was so high that I began developing cysts on my breasts. And I want to be really clear when I share this with all of you, that just because I went vegan and then developed cysts on my breast does not mean that happens to everyone. In fact, sometimes when somebody goes vegan, it heals their body. It's amazing for them. But for me, every single time I would cut meat out of my diet for long periods of time, like over a year in this one case, my whole body was a mess. My headaches were off the charts. My body was not functioning properly. I gained a lot of weight, which, I wasn't too concerned about, but that was another aspect of just noticing if I went for a run, I could feel that on my body. The other thing too is I started to notice that I was running detoxes for other people. This was new in my business. I was helping people detox, and I was getting some results, but I just wasn't getting the results that I knew that I needed to. And I was really starting to wonder why. And I went to see a holistic doctor who's a friend of mine. And I remember him looking at me and saying, Renee, it's you or the cow. It's you or the cow. And long story short is I started to learn that I have a genetic anomaly called MTHFR. And, I look at that as not like maybe something I'll have forever. Maybe I can epigenetically overcome this genetic anomaly. We shall see in time. But for now, what I learned is that my body doesn't detox the same way everyone else does. There's a lot of people, by the way, who have the MTHFR genetics. I also learned that I wasn't absorbing iron from plants in the same way that I was meat. And so what was starting to happen is that as I took the meat out of my diet, as much as I didn't want to eat it, I actually realized that I had to for my health. I also learned that in order to get pregnant years before this, that I had to add in some meat to get pregnant, because I believe that was one of the reasons I wasn't. Now, I know at least a dozen friends of mine who've gotten pregnant on a straight vegan diet and haven't eaten meat in years, right? So does everyone fit this bill? Absolutely not. We're all so different. And I really hope that you're getting that, and that you don't just take my story and say, okay, I'm going to do the same thing, because it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. I would prefer not to have to eat meat, grass-fed. It's very good from a farm, once or twice a month around my menstrual cycle. But that's what I got to do in order for me to feel like a happy, healthy individual. And when I added it back in, my cysts went away in my breasts, my estrogen went down, and I was able to manage the genetic anomaly side effects, I guess I will call them, that I was experiencing. And here's what I also want to say is that this is what I do for a living. I was not perfect, but I was a close to perfect vegan. Like, I was taking B12 shots and I was eating exceptionally well. I wasn't just eating packaged and processed foods. I was doing all the things. And I fought like hell to be a really good vegan, because I didn't want to have to eat the meats. And as much as I like fish. I have to admit that fish just doesn't excite me right now because of the way that our oceans are so polluted. So, there's so much more to the story that I can't go into a ton of it today, but I wanted to kind of give you this idea because it's important we remain open-minded. I have so many vegan friends who will literally tell me, it doesn't matter if my estrogen's high and I have cysts on my breast, I will not kill an animal. And they are so staunch on that. And you know what? I respect their choice. But for me, I became open-minded and I decided that I would remain plant-based, which I would consider myself mostly plant-based. But, if I think about it, I could slowly kill myself because that's kind of what was happening to me. I'm kind of being a little dramatic, but basically, or I could kill the cow, right? And hopefully I can make a difference in the world. And that cow was sacrificed. And there's a lot of people who won't like that I said that. I love cows, so it makes me sad to say that, but that's my truth. And so, it's really important that we be honest with ourselves and that we make a difference in the world and that we also make choices that are the best for our body and our situation. And then we make those choices with the most amount of compassion and knowledge as humanly possible as we do it. And to know that we also aren't going to be perfect. I've had clients who've lost 50 pounds going vegan. And I've also had clients who've lost 50, 60, 70 pounds because they decided to stick to ketosis. And so the goal here again, I know I'm saying it over and over again, but it's really about figure out what works for you. Here's what one of my clients said. She said, I lost 50 pounds so far, but this hasn't been about the weight so much as it's been about me learning about my self-deception. It was me learning about my out of control ego and the comforts that I held on to with food that were hurting me. And so I want to use that little quote. I know we're kind of getting close here on time, just to talk briefly about the ketosis / paleo idea. So there's a lot of different kinds of ideas out here about this. I just want to say one thing. It's really hard to keep our body in ketosis for the most part. So a lot of people might go into the keto diet and spend weeks and weeks, maybe months and months trying to get in ketosis and never feel like they can get there. That is not something that, basically you're not alone. That's common for a lot of people. One of the things that we have seen is that sometimes people can stick to a keto diet a lot longer, maybe than they could a plant-based diet. I know that it also can be a fad, and sometimes fads just go away. There are people who have so much success, but then also one thing that I noticed when I was eating a keto diet is that my body couldn't digest all that fat. It was too much fat for me. And the moment I started eating it, my body was out of control, unhappy. So it was almost for me this frustrating point of plant-based doesn't work. Ketosis doesn't work. What do I do? Vegan doesn't work. What do I do? And obviously I've found what works for me. I'm still evolving. My body's changing constantly. So, I'll keep you posted, but we drink the wheatgrass or the carrot juice or the celery juice and the green drinks, and we have the whole grains and the fruits and the vegetables and the healthy fats. And there's all these different kinds of things that we can be doing. But one of the biggest things that has been more popular these days is also something called intermittent fasting. And that's wonderful. I could do another talk on that. So if you have interest, let me know. But I can tell you also that keto dieters tend to have a hard time with intermittent fasting because our blood sugar, our insulin levels can become pretty unstable. And we need to watch that because we can become lightheaded. Some people who take meat out can also become lightheaded. So keep reminding yourself that the biggest opportunity that you have here is to get to know you, and that diet is only one piece of the puzzle. So what I want to wrap up with, I want to share, one person had shared with me that their biggest problem was that they were eating too fast, and that they realized that they were eating too fast because they were so afraid to slow down and really look at what they were afraid to see. And I thought that was really a powerful thing. And so what's going on inside you is a really big, important question, and understanding that a lot of this has to do with our relationship with food. And so it's the big reason why I also developed my Nutrition 360, because I learned by working with clients for all these years that it's not just about the food. It is, but it's about so much more. It's about the intimacy that we have developed with our bodies, the intimacy that we have with food, and the intimacy that we have in our relationships. And if you have an interest in my Nutrition 360, you can go to reneejayne.com. It's ReneeJayne. I'll put the link below this video once it's in the recording is posted, and you can apply there as well. And just on my website, you'll see a big sign for my Nutrition 360. Click that, and there's a quick, maybe 2-minute application to fill out. But what we have found with a lot of our alumni who have gone through this coaching circle and this program is that there's a yearning, there's a craving for something more, something that maybe we missed out in childhood, a hunger for something that's a little bit deeper than just what to eat, right? And so of course we have this that exists with hundreds and hundreds of people, you know, talking about vulnerability, or talking about, Brene Brown, by the way, is amazing. And she's somebody who talks a lot about vulnerability and shame. And it's hard to do some of this work of looking at ourselves. But if this matters to you, if this is something where you want a new perspective, that, and you know it's about something deeper than just the food, and you're really wanting to heal your perfectionism and feel your feelings that maybe have been dampened, or maybe you don't even know what they are. I have been there. I remember being at a point where I had all these feelings, but I didn't even know how to name them. I didn't even know what to do. And they were so powerful that all I could do was just bury myself in food, because it felt better to do that. And so for some of us, that's the case. So part of what we do in my Nutrition 360 is somatic. We actually start to connect the mind and the body and the spirit. And we do work so you can access some of the trauma points in your body. And we work through a recovery process of healing trauma. And we crave connection as humans. And so we really get that connection. And after 20 years in this industry, I've lived a very privileged life, and I'm very grateful for that. I've had many resources and many trainings and all kinds of opportunities. And I'm really grateful that I get to share them. And I get to share all the shit that I've been through. And I don't tell you all about myself the whole time, but I just use that as a lens so you can then learn from my mistakes, and you don't have to repeat, hopefully, a lot of them. Because I'll tell you something, anger is a big catalyst here. When we think about, you know, getting change to happen in our life, sometimes we fear change. But you know what? If we fear change, we're actually like moving away from the very thing that is inevitable, because change is inevitable and it's not going to go away. It's it's the number one thing that's always happening on planet Earth. Everything changes. And so if we can use our anger in this positive kind of channel or catalyst for us to make that change, it can be powerful. And that anger might not just be anger. It could be frustration, and it could be, it could be a lot of different things about wanting to change the culture. It could be around wanting to change the food system. It could just be this, that you don't want to carry on this stuff to your children, that you want to change the family system that's been happening for years and years in your family, and you want to be that change for you guys. So wherever you are, you know, we're going to go deep into it in my Nutrition 360. And whether you work with me or you work with somebody else, or you maybe had some inspiration today, I hope you did, and you start to make some different changes for yourself, I really hope that you stay in touch. Please reach out to me with any questions or comments. And more importantly, again, one of the things that we do is we really get to this root level of nutrition in the physical body and how to eat. And then we take you full circle with your relationship with food, your relationship with your body, and find a way that you can be in practice in this recovery process of reconnecting with the self. And it's really, really powerful. And I'm so grateful to have been able to spend this time with all of you. Again, my name is Renee Jain, and you can visit me at reneejain.com. And I think that's all. I'm so excited. I think I went about 5 minutes over. I apologize for that. And much love. I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.